Welcome everyone to today's talk. As I mentioned last week, this month I'm trying to go into a little bit of detail around the yogic concept of vairagya, which means detachment. And as always, I'm trying to make these concepts live and breathe and be quite practical in terms of how we can inculcate and cultivate the ancient wisdom into our daily lives. So one of the things that I was reflecting on in relation to this concept of vairagya is the fact that until we start practicing yoga or some kind of mindful practice, we may not realize that there is a choice in terms of whether we live our lives on the surface and more in the plane of ego and mental formation and thought, or whether we live our lives from the depths of our very being in the heart space, as it's referred to in yoga terminology. And what I'd like to go into today is just understanding a little bit more about what is meant by living on the surface and what is meant by actually inhabiting the depths of our being and living and moving and breathing from that deeper space. So typically, for most of our lives, and certainly for me, I really did believe that I was my thoughts. In fact, there was no distinction between the things that I thought and the circumstances of my life and that which I felt myself to be. So in other words, when I felt angry, I was angry. And when I felt happy, I was happy. And when things were disturbing me in my mind, they were front and center of my entire existence. And there was nothing else other than those thoughts and other than those feelings. Equally, for example, if there were circumstances in my life that were challenging, or if there were emotional patterns that were unfolding that were causing challenges in my life and to my emotional well-being, I was completely caught up in them. There was no other perspective. It was that I was sad, it was that I was depressed, it was that I was anxious, and there was no other way of seeing it. Now, from the yogic perspective, this is regarded as essentially being caught in the mind and having no understanding of the fact that there may be a deeper place from which we can exist, which can help to shed different light and different perspective on the thoughts and emotions that stream through our bodies and through our minds on a minute by minute, almost second by second basis. Now, the result of not being aware of this additional place in which we can stand at the center of our being is the fact that we get completely consumed, attached to, and over-identified with everything that's going on in our lives. And as a result of that, we are subject to the dualities of this superficial domain. And what that means is that, for example, if someone comes up to us and tells us that we're the greatest person in the world, we're very joyous and happy. And then equally, if someone comes up to us and tells us that we're the most terrible person in the world, we feel completely dejected, we feel sad, we feel morose, we don't know what to do about it. Equally, we can have moments of feeling very, very satisfied, and we take that to be the unbridled reality of our situation. And equally, we can have moments where things are very, very difficult and tough, and we can't see an end to it, and we think that that is our enduring situation in our lives. So we become attached to the narrative, we become attached to the thoughts, we become identified with the thoughts, and therefore we are completely at the mercy of our thoughts. We are completely at the mercy of external circumstance. And one of the things that yoga really gets us to look into is the extent to which we can control any of these circumstances. Now, there's a much deeper topic we could go into all about karma and the reason why we are living the circumstances of our lives in this moment of time. But I think I'll save that for another video, for another talk. But suffice to say, what we can say, and please do reflect on this, is that really the only thing that we can control in this life is our response or our reaction to the things that are going on around us. Because there are too many factors at play in each and everything that arises as a circumstance in our lives to be able to control those things. So therefore, if we are living on a knife edge, which is either I can control these things to be the way I want them to be, and therefore I am happy, or I can't exert control over these circumstances and they go in a way that I don't want, and therefore I am unhappy, we continue to be affected by the things we are attached to and our expectations of how things should be, rather than letting them just be as they are and finding a deeper perspective through which to view them. So this is very much the idea of living on the surface. It's very much dominated by ego. It's very much dominated by this small sense of self and having to protect ourselves at a certain level. We feel slighted by certain comments. We feel blown up and puffed up in our ego by other comments. And it's a little bit of a roller coaster. And I often give this as an analogy, which is, imagine that you are in a very, very rough storm or ocean or sea, and you're on the surface of that sea or ocean and the waves are crashing down. Every single wave that hits you is going to be water in the mouth, water up the nose, flailing around, and essentially being at the mercy of our circumstances. The other part of this analogy is, imagine that you could just drop down into the ocean by a couple of meters, and imagine that you have breathing apparatus, so you're not going to have to worry about that. And you drop down and you can look up at the surface and you can see the waves and you can see them crashing. And there is some movement at that level. Yes, definitely there is movement, but it's much more easy for us to flow with those movements rather than when we're on the surface and we're being battered by those waves each and every moment. And so what is that deepening down into the ocean that yoga talks about? Well, dependent upon the ancient text that you refer to, there are different ways of essentially describing something which is similar in a certain way, but different according to different ways of viewing it in different texts. But essentially, yoga talks about an awareness or a consciousness or a purusha that is located in our heart space, which is unchanging, which is expansive and boundless, and which ultimately is the experiencer of everything in our lives, but remains unaffected by the content of experience or by the circumstances arising before it. This is Purusha. In the Upanishads, in the Bhagavad Gita, this is referred to more as the self or as the Atman, which again has slightly different connotations, but simply put, this is a space of unchanging peace, of stability, of boundlessness, and a place that is unaffected by the day-to-day dualities of life and the way we experience it. So the practice of vairagya, the practice of detachment, is being able to systematically and methodically over time, using different techniques, to detach from the thought space, to detach from the head space, to step out of believing that we are our thoughts and we are our emotions. And rather than saying, I am angry, we say, I feel anger, because we feel anger in a certain part of us, but there is a space that remains unpolluted by that anger. That space is Purusha. That space is Atman. And again, even with happiness, which I remind people is also a passing phenomena, even when we say, I am happy, we say, I feel happy, because again, it acknowledges that there is a part of us that's happy, but there is a part of us that is beyond the duality of happiness and unhappiness, sadness or pleasure or pain or whatever it might be. And the practice of yoga is being able to connect to and to feel into and identify with this deeper space of being within ourselves, from where we can, with that awareness, we can watch the thoughts passing like clouds. We can watch and notice and experience the emotions, but know that they are only just a small part of us, and that there is a deeper perspective within us that is unchanging, that is boundless, and that is peaceful. And so imagine if every day we are cultivating a relationship with that space within us that has those attributes and qualities, and from that space we watch everything that's going on in our lives. Automatically we drop down from the superficial ego level and we move down into the space of being, the space of heart, the space underneath the waves, where we can look at everything going on, but we are not as affected in each and every moment by the experience of those things arising in our lives. And that is really the nice way of looking at attachment, in the sense that it's not just detachment, it's not about just letting go of the things that cause us to be distracted or cause disturbances in our minds and in our body, but it's also moving closer to, absorbing into the space beyond that, which is this space of being, this space of consciousness, this space of Purusha or Atman, the self. And so that's something I think would be great if everyone could reflect on from today's talk, is just understanding when we are at that level of the mind, how we feel, what it does to ourselves, what it does to our relationships, And if we can cultivate a practice of moving closer to the heart space, which essentially all sound yoga is guiding us towards, then we notice over time, bit by bit, practice by practice, month by month, year by year, we will gradually sink into the depths of being and be able to detach from the surface level of everything that's going on in our lives, and we will be able to establish ourselves in a sense of much greater and deeper stability and equanimity, which will show up in wonderful ways in all of our lives, in all of our relationships, and in all of our connections. So as always, thank you very much for taking the time to listen. I hope you found this video useful, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Namaste.